Hello, I'm Tony Perkins with Washington Watch. Each day, this program provides a biblical perspective on news, including insightful interviews with elected leaders, newsmakers, and cultural experts. I want to thank you for joining us today. We have a great program coming up, but first, here are some headlines from our friends with FISM News.
For FISM News, I'm Samuel Case with today's news update. It's Thursday, September 14th, and here are today's headlines. Well, with a government shutdown looming at the end of the month, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy is now struggling with party hardliners from the House Freedom Caucus. The Washington Post reporting just yesterday, House Republicans failed to move forward with a procedural vote on a Defense Department funding bill, now pushing it off to a later date instead. McCarthy failed to give a top-line number of how much all 12 appropriation bills will cost once passed, and McCarthy is in a tough spot. He does need to appease conservative demands for spending cuts, while also trying to pass bills that can be reconciled with the Democrat-led Senate. Freedom Caucus member Chip Roy says he is willing to negotiate on these things, but what he's not willing to do is go along with past levels of spending. Here he is speaking to Glenn Beck.
You got to figure out how to negotiate to get things done. But what I'm not open to doing is rubber stamping the 2023 spending levels that were passed last December by Pelosi and 17 Republicans who should never have supported it.
Elsewhere, a federal court is once again ruling against the Obama-era Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, a.k.a. DACA. A judge for the Southern District of Texas arguing President Barack Obama overstepped his authority in 2012 when, by executive order, he created this program meant to protect illegal immigrants brought to the U.S. as children from deportation. Judge Andrew S. Hainan says such a policy should have gone through Congress, not just through the president. Protections will stay in place, though, for the more than 500,000 people currently protected by the program. But the judge says no new applications will be allowed from now on. It does mark the second time Hainan ruled against the program and is just the latest in a years-long legal back and forth over the policy. Back in 2021, he struck it down on similar grounds. The Biden administration later tried to sidestep the decision by trying to codify DACA into federal regulation, but was then challenged by 9 Republican states. The Biden White House says it's, quote, deeply disappointed with the new ruling. And finally, looking overseas now, China is apparently preparing for war with the U.S., at least according to shocking words coming from Air Force Secretary Frank Kendall this week. He was speaking at an Air and Space Forces conference. There he said this, quote, "Today the intelligence couldn't be any clearer. Whatever its actual intentions might be, I could not say, but China is preparing for a war, and specifically, it's a war with the United States." Kendall gave more details about what he meant by this on CNBC yesterday. Here he is.
Well, for over a decade now, I've watched what China's been doing to modernize its military. And it's been fairly clear to me that they're designing a force with the intention of having the ability to deter and, if necessary, defeat U.S. intervention in the Western Pacific. They're basically creating the assets that they need to come after what they perceive as our vulnerabilities.
Now, as noted by the Washington Free Beacon, Kendall's comments come as just a month ago, Chinese President Xi Jinping told his military to step up its combat readiness and improve its technology. Meanwhile, Republican Congressman Mike Gallagher, he warned this week as well that current internal problems inside China could lead to increased aggression toward Taiwan. And with that, those are today's headlines from FISM News. Once again, I'm Samuel Case. Your news today, you can find out full details about it by watching our full show tonight. That'll be at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on FISMnews.tv. That's our website. Again, it's FISMnews.tv. You can also find us on social media as well. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, you name it. And you can download the FISM app to Android or smartphone devices so you can take our news on the go. And with all that, stay tuned for Washington Watch with Tony Perkins. We'll be back once again tomorrow with more news coverage. We'll catch you then.
From the heart of our nation's capital, here's Family Research Council President Tony Perkins.
Welcome. Thanks for joining us as we're on the eve of this year's Pray Vote Stand Summit, which begins tomorrow morning here in our nation's capital. Well, coming up today, even as growing inflation eats away at family incomes, President Biden went to the blue state of Maryland to tout Bidenomics.
Because the country should know the facts. They should know the choice between Bidenomics and Maganomics. Look, their plan, Maganomics, is more extreme than anything America's ever seen before.
The numbers of Bidenomics just don't add up. And the question is, could the Biden administration be cooking the numbers? We're going to get a reality check from Joel Griffith with the Heritage Foundation. And today, federal prosecutors indicted Hunter Biden on gun charges. The 3 counts are tied to possessing a gun while using narcotics. Question is, as we talked about earlier this week with a member of the House Judiciary Committee, could this block Republicans from accessing certain documents related to the Biden family because of ongoing criminal investigation? We'll take a look at it. As Congress nears the September 30th end of the fiscal year and no budget yet for next year, the two sides don't seem to be anywhere near finding common ground.
House Republicans have made clear that they are determined to shut down the government and try to jam their extreme right-wing ideology down the throats of the American people.
That was House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries earlier today. Frankly, it sounds like Democrats are looking in a mirror. But here is what House Speaker Kevin McCarthy had to say earlier today about government funding.
We're going to get this done. Nobody wins in a government shutdown. Nobody wins in a government shutdown. I've been here. But what we want to do is we want to be able to win the policies that we've been fighting for and telling the American public.
Now, I was talking with Republican leadership today. I've had conversations with, as you've heard on the program here, with members of the House Freedom Caucus. It's only the Democrats that are saying they want to shut down government, that Republicans want to do that. Republicans aren't saying they want to shut down government, but they're saying they're not going to continue funding government under the budget of Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. The failed policies that eat away at the ability of families to provide for themselves and shove these liberal leftist values, indoctrination, down our throats. That's what they're saying. So we're gonna have a conversation with Travis Weber, Vice President of FRC's Policy Shop and our Government Affairs a little bit later. And Speaker McCarthy also raised questions about the White House giving instructions to the media.
I'm not sure, based upon how many of you got the memo from the White House legal counsel on what you should say. I didn't know that was the role of the White House, to try to control the media. I thought you had a First Amendment opportunity.
Well, we talked about that yesterday, and we're going to continue to track that. The White House is getting more scrutiny over their instructions to the legacy media, basically telling them to ignore the Republicans' impeachment inquiry. Very interesting. And as I mentioned, tomorrow is the Pray Vote Stand Summit, and kicking off the event will be Rabbi Jonathan Cahn, and he's going to join me here in studio a little bit later with a preview of tomorrow's message. And here's another aspect of the left's cancel culture. It's called debanking, cutting off conservative religious organizations from banking service. And this is growing among mega banks like Bank of America, J.P. Morgan Chase, and Truist. They're cutting off conservatives. We're going to talk about that with a religious organization that was cut off because, I guess, they're too conservative. That's coming up a little bit later here on Washington Watch. Our word for today comes from 1 Corinthians chapter 12, where Paul is calling for unity in the body of Christ. For as the body is one and has many members, but all the members of that one body being many are one body, and so is Christ. When I was in the Marine Corps in basic training, Marine recruits spent hours and hours in close order drill, marching in formation. In fact, I almost wore the heels off my boots that they issued me, marching hour after hour, day after day on the asphalt grinder, as they called it. But by the end of basic training, there was nothing I enjoyed more than marching in unison with a platoon of 60 Marines. When our heels would strike the deck as we marched, it was just the sound of one heel. We were many members, but we walked as one. We had different roles and positions, but we worked together. That is exactly what the church should look like. To find out more about our journey through the Bible, go to frc.org/Bible. Well, despite facing an impeachment inquiry, a potential government shutdown, another month of accelerating inflation due to his economic policies, President Biden traveled to the Washington, D.C. suburb of Largo, Maryland this afternoon to deliver yet another speech where he claims Bidenomics is working. But a recent CNN poll confirms that a majority of Americans, 58%, say that the president's policies have hurt economic conditions. And recent data indicates working families continue to get hit as food and energy inflation jumped in August for the second month in a row. Well, joining me to talk about this and government funding and a host of other things is Travis Weber, Vice President of FRC's Policy Shop, as well as our Government Affairs Division. Travis, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Tony.
All right, let's start. The president talking about his economic policies, but yet it appears that those policies are hurting American families.
Yeah, I mean, Tony, it's very interesting if you look at these speeches and what hits the news, and a speech like this will hit a lot of the news and kind of be disseminated. The same story will kind of reach different outlets, but often be repeating a lot of the same thing. Americans taking that in can develop a very day-by-day, very short-sighted interpretation of what's actually happening, what's real. We need to place this, when you see a speech like that, in context of the larger picture of America's national debt, our financial health, and financial risk, and the manner in which we are spending money. I mean, these are issues that are going to come home to roost at some point, and it's not fair to just take the talking points interpretation of what's happening.
Well, I want to play a clip from his speech that he made earlier today, and because this ties into the budget debate that's currently going on. Play clip number 11, please. All right, I think they're pulling that clip up. So let's go to, and we'll play it in just a moment here. But the debate right now, where we saw last year the federal deficit almost doubled, went from $1 trillion to $2 trillion. What we have are Republicans saying that we will not continue funding government as it has been. Yeah. We have the appropriations bills that actually we've worked on. We've got some good policies in there. Where do things stand on the Hill?
Yeah, so it's interesting. Tony, usually we're looking at a debate between doing what's known as a continuing resolution, kind of maintaining current levels, high as they may be, or actually pushing bills out the door that are often higher. Now the debate has shifted to the question of a continuing resolution being too high. Instead, people saying we need to put the brakes. Member of Congress saying we need to put the brakes on that. In light of the situation, so the whole parameters have shifted. This should tell us how bad the levels are.
Well, and as I had a conversation with a member of the House Republican leadership today, I said, look, if you guys push this forward, you're going to own it. If you do a continuing resolution, what they call a clean, meaning no changes to it, you own the Biden, Schumer, Pelosi budget.
There's a lot of detail in there, a lot of money, and a lot of programming that goes to things that do not honor the things of the Lord. And it behooves us to really look under the hood to see what is being spent on.
Budgeting is a moral issue, especially when you look at what this money is funding. And it is something as believers we need to be aware of, because our money is funding this.
Very much. I mean, we've dealt with this over the years. I mean, we're talking so much money going out the door. I mean, some of these programs alone, billions and billions of dollars, reauthorizations, and then you look at the annual spending, the numbers are astounding. And then you look at the content. I mean, we need to look at it, like we're saying, and look at the overall levels.
We have that clip now. Play clip number 11.
On my watch, the deficit already has fallen by over $1 trillion. $1 trillion so far. I signed legislation to reduce the deficit by another $1 trillion over the next decade. And the budget I'm putting forward this year would cut the deficit by another $2.5 trillion on top of that.
I mean, this. I have to restrain myself in responding to this because they really, and unfortunately maybe it's true, that the American people are just ill-informed. What he's making reference to is the fact that we had over $3 trillion in emergency spending because of COVID. That was one-time spending. It was supposed to be. But when he came in as president, he actually continued $1 trillion of it. He cut $2 trillion, which again, $3 trillion was supposed to be one-time money. He kept $1 trillion of it going. He says, I cut the deficit by $2 trillion. But last year he doubled it. So he now has $2 trillion, and he wants to do that again this year.
So the question is, what is it being cut in reference to? And like you just said, it goes way up. We can't look at it going a little bit down. You have to look at the larger
picture. That's what the Republicans, the House Freedom Caucus members that we've had on the program are saying, we want to go back to the pre-COVID with reasonable increases, percentage increases. That's where we want to use as the baseline, which makes absolute reasonable sense.
And Tony, even if we back up to that point, we look at the way the American public understands spending and debt and finance. You know, we're, as a country, we're in a position where far too many people are looking to the government to provide what they need as the first point of security. It's not meant to be the first point of security. The government is not our father and mother.
But even that fraction that might do that, when you look at the additional funding that goes to promote abortion, goes to promote government dependency, which promotes the indoctrination of children, not just here in the United States, but, you know, we're working on this PEPFAR bill, which is, you know, has a good core to it of protecting people from the spread of AIDS in Africa. But under this administration, it's being used to push the LGBTQ agenda, to push abortion. That's where our tax dollars are going.
Well, if you look at that program, we're talking about $30 billion that they want to authorize now this year alone for the next 5 years. $30 billion. All we're saying is make sure the language is not, the money does not promote abortion and ideologies on these poor African countries we're trying to help. I mean,
here's the bottom line as I see this, and is that when you hear the president, and I hate to say this, I really do, but I have to say it. When you hear the president and you hear Democrats saying this stuff, and there's probably some of it on the right as well, it's just not true. There's just absolutely no truth in what the president is saying. He is misleading the American people.
We're going to have to give an account for our words, and that includes him, especially as our leader. Those in authority have a greater accountability and responsibility because their words are leading many either towards truth, towards goodness and blessing, or astray. And everyone's going to have to account, but it's important that we understand that. They understand that and take heed of the ultimate authority under God, and we pray for proper judgment, wisdom, and right action and repentance.
Well, and Christians need to be discerning in the news that they get. That's why primarily on this program, you don't hear a lot of commentary. This is actually a little unusual to do this much commentary, is the newsmakers, so that people hear for themselves and hopefully will educate themselves, as this being one resource, to know what is actually going on in this country.
We need to rightly discern as believers walking ahead, and it's only going to grow more important, Tony.
Travis, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you.
All right, folks, on the other side of the break, we're going to take a deeper look at those numbers, these economic numbers. I tell you what, I feel it every time I go in the grocery store. I mean, literally every time I'm shocked at how much I'm having to pay for groceries. It keeps going up. And I'm finding out I'm not the only one experiencing that. We're going to talk with Joel Griffith with Heritage Foundation. Take a look at the numbers. Is the Biden administration cooking the economic numbers they've been feeding Americans? That's next. Don't go away.
In recent years, Christians have seen an accelerated assault on not just our core beliefs, but their very foundation. Now is the time to build on that foundation, strengthen our faith, and learn how to translate our beliefs into actions that engage the culture around us. That's the purpose behind this year's Pray, Vote, Stand Summit. Believe and engage. Pray, Vote, Stand Summit is a national gathering of spiritually active, governance-engaged conservatives, or SageCons. We'll hear from Christian leaders, worldview experts, government officials, and more. We'll discuss important issues like the sanctity of life, religious freedom, protecting students, strengthening families, praying for our nation, and how you can impact America's future from a biblical worldview. Together, we can believe and engage. Join us September 15th through 17th in Washington, D.C. for this pivotal event. Register now at PrayVoteStand.org.
Everything we do begins as an idea. Before there can be acts of courage, there must be the belief that some things are worth sacrificing for. Before there can be marriage, there is the idea that man should not be alone. Before there was freedom, there was the idea that individuals are created equal. It's true that all ideas have consequences, but we're less aware that all consequences are the fruit of ideas. Before there was murder, there was hate. Before there was a Holocaust, there was the belief by some people that other people are undesirable. Our beliefs determine our behavior, and our beliefs about life's biggest questions determine our worldview. Where did I come from? Who decides what is right and wrong? What happens when I die? Our answers to these questions explain why people see the world so differently. Debates about abortion are really disagreements about where life gets its value. Debates over sexuality and gender and marriage are really disagreements about whether the rules are made by us or for us. What we think of as political debates are often much more than that. They're disagreements about the purpose of our lives and the source of truth. As Christians, our goal must be to think biblically about everything. Our goal is to help you see beyond red and blue, left and right, to see the battle of ideas at the root of it all. Our goal is to equip Christians with a biblical worldview and help them advance and defend the faith in their families, communities, and the public square. Cultural renewal doesn't begin with campaigns and elections. It begins with individuals turning from lies to truth. But that won't happen if people can't recognize a lie and don't believe truth exists. We want to help you see the spiritual war behind the political war, the truth claims behind the press release, and the forest from the trees.
Welcome back to Washington Watch. Good to have you with us on the eve of the Pray Vote Stand Summit that begins tomorrow morning. Right here in our nation's capital. In fact, a little bit later, Rabbi Jonathan Kahn, who will be our first speaker tomorrow morning, will be joining me here in studio. If you can't make it to D.C., you can still participate. To find out, go to PrayVoteStand.org. A little bit later this afternoon, you'll be able to register to watch online and participate in this entire summit, which takes place tomorrow and Saturday, all the way through Saturday night. All right, as I've been discussing, President Biden delivered what the White House called a major economic address just hours ago in Maryland. Though the president continues to claim the economy is doing great and Bidenomics is working, the White House is growing frustrated that poll numbers don't reflect such claims. Well, the Biden administration wants voters to ignore that inflation has wiped out savings and instead cheer for the CHIPS Acts or investments in green energy. But American voters recognize the president's policies have created this situation. 58% blame the president's policies, according to the latest CNN poll. All right? But what does the consumer price from August tell us, price index from August, tell us about the current economic conditions? And what trends can we detect to forecast future conditions? Well, joining me now to talk about this from the Heritage Foundation is Joel Griffith. Joel, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Hey, thanks for having me tonight.
So give us an overview of what the August inflation numbers tell us.
Well, August inflation numbers were more bad news. We saw the overall inflation rate of 0.6%. Annualized, that's about 7.2%. And these numbers add up, these fractions of 1%. If you go back now over the last 26 months of the Biden presidency, because inflation has been so high, 21 of those 26 months, families have experienced a real pay cut because wages failed to keep up with price hikes. So all in all, we actually see the typical family income is down by about $5,000 per year relative to where it was at the beginning of 2021. And that's not even taking into account things like higher credit card fees, which are accounting for about $1,500 a year for a typical family. And of course, doesn't even account for the cost of a home if you're looking to get a new mortgage.
So, Joe, let's talk a little bit about whether or not the Biden administration is cooking the numbers. From a standpoint of, we're seeing almost every time we get a jobs report that, we get these headlines that created so many jobs, but then we go back, quietly, a few weeks later, they actually say, well, actually, it wasn't that many jobs. And so there's a claim out there that we're creating all these jobs, that the economy is going so hot, but when you look at the actual numbers, it doesn't show it.
No, you're exactly right. Almost each and every month the past year, we have seen the jobs estimates revised downwards the following month. And if you dig just a little bit under the surface on these jobs report, you find out something else that's very startling. We have been losing full-time jobs. Each and every month, the president does this victory lap about the number of jobs created. But over the last 5 months, we have actually lost well over 100,000 full-time jobs, which begs the question, why is it, how is it that we see the total number of jobs increase? Well, that's because the number of part-time jobs is increasing, even as the number of full-time jobs is falling. And that shouldn't come as a surprise to us. People are finding it necessary to work multiple jobs because they've depleted their savings. Savings rates right now are near an all-time low of 4%. And as we've depleted the savings, families have added credit card debt. We've seen families add around $3,000 of credit card debt just over the past few years. Families are strapped, they're working more and going into debt.
The president today in his speech in Maryland was talking about, I'm happy if we have billionaires, but we're just going to tax them more. We've seen the stock market, we've heard the stock market's doing well, but even in the second quarter, the corporate profits have shown a very significant downward turn. There's several economic indicators here that suggest that the picture's not as rosy as the Biden administration would paint.
Oh, no, you're right. There's numerous pictures, including the manufacturing index, which seems to have stagnated, the industrial output index as well. If you look at the number of full-time job openings, we saw the number of openings decline from around 11 million to just about 8 million recently. And, we have to recognize what has been the cause of this. Of course, the shutdowns, which should have never happened, that's a big problem. But we also saw that size of government grossly expand. And because of that, limited amounts of capital that we have that should be invested into new research development, new infrastructure, new buildings for private businesses to produce, that has been sucked up by the government, both in terms of taxation, but also in terms of the government borrowing. And that's a big part of the reason why growth has been so subdued.
So, Joel Griffith, how should that factor into this debate that's going on right now over government funding and a possible government shutdown? We've got conservatives saying we've got to cut back on the spending. The Democrats saying, oh, you're just wanting to shut down government. How should this information factor in?
Well, we have to recognize that the economic malaise right now has been caused by this gross expansion of government overspending and money printing. If you look in terms of the money that we're spending each year, right now, the federal government, they're spending $80,000 per family of four each year. And what is stunning is about $25,000 of your family tax bill is actually being, or your family spending component is being borrowed and printed. The interest on the federal debt alone this year amounts to around $10,000 per family of four. And every dollar that goes to fund the government or goes to pay the interest payments on that debt, that is a dollar that could have been invested in the research, development, and equipment that would allow us all to be more productive and to earn more, not just the shareholders and the wealthy, but allows all of us as middle-class Americans to be more prosperous as well. And both Republicans and Democrats have been part of this problem. If you go back to the COVID era, those enormous spending packages were passed with broad Republican and Democrat support. And of course, the left now in Congress has made it even worse since President Biden took office.
Now, final question. We're out of time, Joel. But I'm not one given to going by our feelings. But when it comes to the economy, I'm more inclined to go by what we feel than what we hear out of Washington.
No, and in this case, our feelings are correct. We know that we're spending more on our rent and our mortgage payments to fill up our car and on the food. And as it turns out, it shows up in the data. We know from the data, which tracks grocery stores, food costs are up 25%, gasoline's up 50%. And what doesn't even show up in that percentage number is the fact that if you buy a house, the mortgage payment on a typical home 2 years ago, $975. That same house today is going to cost you $2,100 per month, which means that the majority of American families right now can't even afford to purchase their own middle-class home.
Wow. Well, Joe, we'll have to leave it there. Thanks so much for taking time to join us.
Thank you. Have a great night.
Folks, stick with us. We're back after this.
All of us are born with the desire to find truth and meaning. Where did I come from? What happens when I die? While our answers to these questions may divide us, we are united in our need for the freedom to answer life's biggest questions and make life's biggest decisions for ourselves. That's why religious freedom matters for everyone. Religious freedom matters because the powerful have long wanted to control those who are less powerful. Religious freedom matters because the freedom of those who are different is often threatened by those who believe different is dangerous. Leah Sheribu, a Christian teenager in Nigeria, remains a captive of Boko Haram for her refusal to renounce her Christian faith. Chinese pastor Wang Yi is serving a 9-year sentence for speaking publicly against the Chinese government. All of this because people in power decided different is dangerous. At the Center for Religious Liberty at Family Research Council, we promote religious freedom for everyone because the only alternative is religious freedom for no one. We encourage Americans and the American government to engage and advocate for the persecuted, and they do. We work every day to bring good news to the afflicted, to proclaim liberty to captives and freedom to prisoners. We do it because that's what Jesus does. We work to give freedom to others because we ourselves have been set free.
This is Washington Watch. I'm Tony Perkins, your host of the website, TonyPerkins.com. Again, starting tomorrow morning, the Pray Vote Stand Summit takes place here in our nation's capital. You can be a part of it. If you're in the area, come join us. You can find out more by going to PrayVoteStand.org. And a little bit later, we're actually opening up. You can watch online. You can participate online. We'll have more details a little bit later at PrayVoteStand.org. All right, this is a troubling trend. We've talked about it before. My good friend Sam Brownback, former ambassador at large for international religious freedom and former U.S. senator, former governor, former congressman. He, in fact, was a part of helping him set up the National Committee for Religious Freedom. And he was making a deposit shortly after they set up their account with J.P. Morgan Chase. They canceled his account. And here's the reason they gave, that he was a politically exposed person with a customer risk profile. What? That's something that's usually attached to foreign nationals, not former U.S. senators or governors or ambassadors. The real reason is that he is a conservative Christian, and they were advocating for religious freedom. Well, he's not the only one. Many other organizations. We've had our own tussle. In fact, if you're Christian and you're open about it, or you're conservative or biblically based, it's just a matter of time before the cancel crowd comes after you. It's in banking, it's in credit card processing. Dr. Jennifer Roback Morse, founder and president of the Pro-Family Ruth Institute, they lost their payment processing capabilities after being targeted by the anti-Christian group Southern Poverty Law Center, which we know a little bit about. And she joins us now to talk more about that. Dr. Morse, welcome to Washington Watch.
Well, thanks for having me on, Tony. I'm glad to talk about this important topic.
Yeah, so tell us about how did this come about? How did they notify you?
This, I think we were among the first people to have something like this happen to us. It was back in 2017. One day we got a note from our credit card processor saying, we're not going to do business with you anymore because it's come to our attention that you don't meet our values, or something very vague like that. And we went and checked our bank account, and sure enough, the credit card processor was already gone, right? So zero notification, zero honest to goodness explanation for what had happened, in spite of a number of people, really digging at the time. A couple of journalists did some digging, and we traced it. We're pretty sure that Wells Fargo Bank was lurking in the background, but we don't know exactly how. But we're also quite certain that it had to do with us being on the hate list of the Southern Poverty Law Center, just like you guys are. So, but no one knows really how you get on the list or how you get off the list, and so they're really totally unaccountable with this type of stuff.
Yeah, I mean they're a leftist hit group, is what they are, and that's all. They're a attack dog for the left, the junkyard dog for the left, and they make money off this. I mean, they're sitting on millions of dollars offshore. So let's talk about the process here. So you inquired with your processor, and they basically did not give you a reason other than you don't meet our values?
Right. We went back and forth with them a couple of times, and what we did, and I'll tell you, Tony, if there was one thing I could convey to your followers and your watchers and your listeners, this is the way to handle yourself. I'm confident that the way we conducted ourselves was really crucial to what happened next, because we issued a press release and said, okay, we're the Ruth Institute, and what we stand for is we have a dream that every child be welcomed into life in a loving home with a married mother and father, their own mother and father married to each other. If that makes us a hate group, fine, come get us. Basically we, led with our chin there, so to speak. Yeah. And we got a whole bunch of very favorable coverage. And then Vanco comes crawling back and says, oh, well, maybe we could reinstate you. And we're like, sure, you apologize, you give us an explanation. Yeah, we'll think about it, but nothing like that. It was just this ridiculous arrogance of these people, we'll deign to do business with you. And we're like, well, we already found another company to do business with us. Thank you very much. Well, I think this was a company, Tony, this is a company, Vanco. They advertised themselves as a suitable, wonderful group to help churches manage their credit card processing. So I think the publicity that we got probably didn't help them any, but I can't really know that for sure, but that's how it looks to me.
Well, I would agree with you, Dr. Morse. I think that's exactly what we should do. We should not shrink back and be fearful. I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ, and we should speak that out. You're not ashamed of the fact, and nor are we, because we're on the list for the same reason. We believe that every child deserves a mom and a dad who is married, a mother and a father, and working for that in public policy, there's nothing to be ashamed of for that.
That's right. That's exactly right.
So you have another processor that is more favorable?
We haven't had a minute's trouble since we switched over. Yeah,
I think there's going to be, and in fact, I'm already talking to some bankers in different parts of the country, one actually in Oklahoma, First Bank. They're making this a huge marketing opportunity for them, because they're saying, hey, they don't want you, we do. And so I think you're going to see a lot more Christian, faith-based, friendly businesses that are going to crop up and say, hey, come over here, we'll make room for you.
Yes, and the more that corporate America goes woke the way they have been, there's plenty of evidence that corporate America is following some other playbook besides just maximizing profits.
You are absolutely correct.
Right.
It's spiritual. It's spiritual in nature. Dr. Morse, we're going to have to leave it there. We're out of time. Thanks so much for joining us, and I appreciate you sharing the story.
Well, thanks very much for having me, Tony.
All right. And speaking of the spiritual, we are in a major spiritual battle in this country, and it's more clear today than ever before. We're going to talk about that next with Rabbi Jonathan Cahn here on Washington Watch. Don't go away. It begins here, and here, and here, every day. Before you stand, you need solid ground. Standing in a culture that wants you to surrender the truth won't work unless you have a firm foundation. At Family Research Council, we have that firm foundation, and you can find us standing. We stand for the value of all human life. We stand for the right of families to flourish. And every day we stand for your freedom to believe and to live out those beliefs both at home and abroad. We work with government officials, educating them on the issues from a biblical worldview. And when necessary, we hold them accountable. We equip Christians across America to be informed and to take action in their communities. With our daily radio program, television appearances, and vast online presence, we reach people where they are. We envision an America where all human life is valued, families flourish, and religious liberty thrives. And that won't be realized if we're not standing. Stand for faith. Stand for family. Stand for freedom. Stand with us at FRC. I'm often asked by people, Tony, how do you stay encouraged? How do you deal with all of the stuff in Washington, D.C., the negative policies that are attacking our faith, our family, and our freedoms? Well, you want me to let you in on the secret? It's called the Word of God. And that is why the Family Research Council embarked on Stand on the Word, a 2-year journey through the Bible. It's a chronological Bible reading plan with just 10 to 15 minutes a day. In 2 years, you will have covered the entire Bible. And to go along with this, Monday through Friday, I do a morning devotional that goes along with the reading of the day. It's all designed to encourage you on this journey because the Word of God, as the psalmist said, in my affliction, here's my comfort. Your Word gives me life. That is our source of strength. To find out more, go to tonyperkins.com or frc.org/Bible. And I invite you to join me every morning for our Stand on the Word Bible devotion.
This fall, believers from across America will gather in our nation's capital. We'll hear from government leaders, policy experts, and leading Christian voices, learning how we can engage in government at every level, from local school boards to state legislatures to Congress and even the White House, to win back the soul of our nation. Join with us for the Pray, Vote, Stand Summit, Believe and Engage, September 15th through 17th. Register now at prayvotestand.org.
FRC, celebrating 40 years with Senator Roger Marshall.
It's great to have FRC out there saying, wait a second, we're the normal ones. We're the normal ones that were raised with faith as a virtue, as a value, thinking that family was important, that it's still important, and standing for God and country. All I can say is it would be worse. God always provides a way, and I think that God has a purpose for FRC to be here.
Well, that was Senator Roger Marshall, a great friend of FRC and a great friend of the family fighting for life, religious liberty, all the things we care about on Capitol Hill. And this weekend, actually starting in the morning, is our Pray, Vote, Stand Summit, and it happens to be our 40th anniversary. So we're going to have a great time of really celebrating God's faithfulness and what He has done over the course of the 40 years. That's going to be Saturday night. We're going to have a gala, and we're going to have in fact, we're going to have the founding president of the Family Research Council, Jerry Regier, is going to be there, and then the second president, Gary Bauer, is going to be joining us. We're going to hear from Dr. James Dobson, who was a part of the founding, and a whole host of speakers as we celebrate the 40th anniversary. And of course, tomorrow, we've got a great informative lineup of speakers tomorrow night. We're also going to hear from some of the presidential candidates. We're going to hear from former President Donald Trump. We're going to hear from the former Vice President Mike Pence. We're going to hear from Governor Ron DeSantis. We're going to hear from Vivek Ramaswamy. So we got a great lineup. Find out more. Go to prayvotestand.org. All right, just to kind of set the stage for the conversation I'm going to have here with Rabbi Jonathan Cahn. I've played this before, but I think we need to be listening. I know it's hard, but we need to be listening to what the president, some of those around him, are saying. And this is something the president repeats often. Play this clip of the president.
We are in a battle for the soul of America. We're in a battle for the very soul of this nation. and that's not hyperbole, that we're in a battle for the soul of America. I ran for president because I believe we're in a battle for the soul of this nation. And we're seeing how the battle for the soul of America has been far from won.
I believe him when he says that. Not much I believe that he says, but I think on this he speaks truth. We are in a battle for the soul of our nation, and it is, yes, there's political aspects of this, but at its heart, this is a spiritual battle for the soul of our nation. And that is why our first speaker tomorrow morning, I called him, and after praying about it, Rabbi Jonathan Cahn, who last year wrote a book called The Return of the Gods. If you've not read the book, he's got a new book out. He writes books faster than I can read them. But this book, The Return of the Gods, connects a lot of the dots, and it speaks to the spiritual battle that is raging in our nation. And he joins me now to discuss this and give us a preview of what he is going to say tomorrow. Rabbi, thanks so much for joining us.
Great to be here. Always, Tony.
Before we get into that, I know we had you on last week, but you got a new book out, the Josiah Manifesto. How's that going?
I was just told on the train coming here, I was told it's #1, Wall Street Journal #1.
Wow.
And publisher, clear,
You just have a knack for that. But what is so interesting is there's clearly insight, biblical, spiritual insight here. And I want to go to the Return of the Gods.
Yes.
Because we're at a new level, and I know, Christians, we talk about spiritual warfare, and that's real. Paul talked about it. He said we wrestle not against flesh and blood.
Yes.
But the intensity of that has increased, I would say, 100-fold in our country during the 20 years I've been here.
Yeah. Yeah, well, what's the foundation of this is we have a nation that has turned from God, and when you do that, you create a vacuum, and
that's biblical.
Yeah, it goes back to that parable of Jesus when he says, the spirit goes out of the house, out of the man. The house remains empty, and so more spirits come back in. That is the principle, but not just for a man, but for a nation or a civilization. Any nation that has known God, as America has, and the West, and that's really been cleansed of paganism, that if it ever turns away from God, its house is not going to stay empty. What was cast out is coming back into it.
With friends.
And that's what we have been witnessing. And so when it starts, it's subtle. Like, say, you look at the 60s, we start removing God from here. Right. It's subtle, but as it goes on, it's no more subtle. It gets more and more brazen.
If I recall that passage right, it's not 100-fold; it'd be 7-fold.
In this case, actually 8, because it's 1 plus. Yeah, and which means actually when you have a civilization that has known God has turned away, that it's going to be worse than it was at the beginning. It's going to be worse than paganism. Because that's where Western culture started. It was pagan, was cleansed by the gospel, and now it's going to be worse. A pagan culture produces a Nero, but a post-Christian culture produces a Hitler.
I thought about this as I read the book, and I don't think you and I have talked about this, but is a part of what we see today where we see those who are apologizing to the past pagan cultures a sign of the fact that we're worse off than we were back then, that we're actually apologizing to the pagan cultures that God pushed out so we could come in?
I would say absolutely yes. It would be like if we were in Israel when it was turning away from God, and now it's embracing Baal and apologizing for what it did to Baal and Ashtoreth and Molech and all that. Exactly. It's not an accident that it's pagan, and we are now championing that.
What is the way forward when that begins to happen?
Well, one is one is that this is not new in the sense that if we were living back in Israel and they went through this because they knew God, they turned away from God.
And we can read about it.
Yeah.
We just read our Bible.
Yeah, but we figure it's back then, but now we're actually in it.
But see, that's a part of the thing, is that Satan can take on the image of an angel of light, and they change the labels, and people say, well, it doesn't match with this.
That's right.
But it's just a different disguise.
Right. No, it doesn't match because, back then they were offering up their children on altars. Now we're offering them in abortion. They've offered thousands of them. We've offered 60 million. So, it's the same spirit. Back then you had sexual immorality all the pagan world, you had gender confusion. You had men dressing up as women. You had actually transitions. That's one of the goddesses in there. You have it now. It just has another term. It's exactly right. One of the things I said at the beginning is when these spirits come back, or the gods come back, they don't come back saying we are pagan spirits.
They don't have a neon sign saying we're pagans.
No. They say we are enlightened. We're awake now. We're awoken. We are now awake. Yet it's the same spirit. And when you look at the culture, you look at what's happened with the sexual revolution. Everything is to pagan values. Everything. Whether it's abortion, whether it is the destruction of marriage, whether it's the destruction of gender. This goes back to Babylon. This goes back. So this is, on one hand, the form is new, as you said, but on the other hand, we're in the same boat that the prophets were.
And I think people need to understand when Paul talks about in Ephesians 6 that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against rulers of darkness at this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in heavenly places. We often talk about how history repeats itself. It's because the drivers of history are the same. These principalities are the same, working through new people who are, we take our place on the earth for a period of time, but those principalities remain.
We're in a drama. That's right. We're in a drama. And the thing is that this is the thing, because we've never known that it's like you don't know what you've got till it's gone. And so we've had a Judeo-Christian culture. I'm not saying everybody was Christian, but it was a Judeo-Christian culture.
It was dominated by those principles.
Yeah, and the thing is that when you get that out, there's never been anything else. It's either paganism in one form or another, or it's God. When you take God out, there's no middle ground, and there never has been. So now we're just experiencing it. It's a very dramatic time in history. We're just experiencing what the other side is. But for believers, biblically, this was the rule. For Moses dealt with the gods of Egypt, Elijah dealt with the gods of Canaan, Paul dealt with the gods of Rome. So this is actually, a Christian culture was actually an exception. So we're back in very biblical times. A lot of believers are saying, I wish I lived in biblical times. Congratulations.
All right, you're here.
Yeah.
So how do we live in biblical times?
Well, we live biblically, and that is one of the mysteries I talk about is that, and this is prophetic in the sense that I believe the end of the age parallels the beginning. In the beginning of the age, you had an Israel in the world, you got it back. In the end of the beginning of the age, you had a not Christian culture, you had an anti-Christian pagan culture. That's coming back. But in the beginning of the age, if everything's going back, we have to go back to where we were, which is the book of Acts. That was not a cultural thing. It was countercultural. It was not status quo religion. It was revolutionary. It was radical. It was all out.
Yes, that last part there, that's what I was about to say. Their faith was the center of everything.
Yeah.
They lived it. Community was extremely important. They did everything together. They shared those things. Now, they had their difficulties. I mean, we see that.
They were human.
Yeah, they had problems. Paul's letters was correcting them on a whole host of things.
Yeah.
But their faith was not an accessory to their lives. It was who they were.
That's right. They were not. If you look at the church back then, look at the church of the Middle Ages, you had everything but you had so much attachment. When you look at the beginning, you didn't have a lot of money, you didn't have a lot of physical power, you didn't have a lot of organization. You had basically they were in the wake of the resurrection, in the wake of Messiah. Everything was that. We have to get back to that. And I think one of the things is that when you look at where things are going, it's kind of like the graves are disappearing and things are going back to where it was, even with us. So just standing for God in this time, if we stand for God, we're going to become like them because it forces us to become radical. If the evil is getting radical, the good has to get radical.
Well, that's the parable of the wheat and the tares that Jesus talked about, saying this is a picture of the end times. The bad is going to grow, it's going to get worse, but the good is as well. The wheat is going to grow. And he reminded them to stay focused on the wheat.
Yes,
we need to be we need to be focused on the good. Also, when you look at harvest, when you look at the New Testament church, everywhere they preached the gospel, people's lives were being transformed by it.
Yeah, well, the other side is that the more that we stand out for the culture, we talk about, and pastors talk about the candle in the night. Well, it's true. Back then, we've kind of been the candle in the day when you have a Christian culture. But when you have an anti-Christian culture, we're the candle in the night. The candle stands out more, but it's more powerful, and the message becomes more powerful. And our lives, everything we do becomes radical.
And this is why I'm going to talk about this a little bit tomorrow before I introduce you, but this is why we've changed our Value Voter Summit that we had for 15 years to the Pray Vote Stand Summit, is because we know it's not just a set of values, it's biblical values that we must return to. And when we talk about prayer, it's not only about praying and asking God to move in our nation, but it is walking with God according to His Word and encourage believers back to the Word of God. I've been very clear about this. I do not believe we will be able to face the circumstances ahead unless we are rooted in the Word of God. And it's not just a matter of survival. I actually think we'll thrive in this environment if we are rooted in the Word of God.
Yeah, that is when you look at all the people who stood, from Moses to Paul to, Josiah. That's one of the reasons I wrote Josiah, is because that's what he was in darkness. This is it.
And he came on the heels of Manasseh, and I mean
his father, his grandfather were evil, apostate, and yet despite that,
and God's hand of judgment was coming upon the nation.
That's right. I believe we are at the Josiah moment right now, where we've got judgment on one hand, but God is giving a chance right now, a chance for us to be that, and it's exactly what you said. He was rooted. We have to be more.
And remember, it was during his time. Remember when the priest, the high priest, discovered the Scripture.
That's right. It's the whole revival started with the Word. Started with the Word, and the same powers that he had to be separate from his culture. He had to be weaned from it. He had to be plugged into God with prayer and the Word, and then he could be a light to it. He literally changed the course. You said judgment was coming. God held it for an entire generation.
Exactly right.
God is never finished. So we are people of hope. God is never finished. But to me, and I mean this, this could be the most exciting time, because we want biblical times. These are truly the dynamics that creates greatness if we will rise to it.
Well, this is in Luke chapter 18. Jesus said that men ought to pray and not lose heart. I think there is this propensity right now with all of the evil coming in, and the enemy's desire, and I say the enemy of our soul, is to discourage us, to wave a white flag, to give in, and then of course
darkness wins.
That's right.
Yeah, and the thing is that God honors again. God is never finished. His plans are never finished. We can't be finished. And the other thing is, we can't live on the defense. We have to defend, but we have to live on the offense. That's our mission. We're not on earth to hang out or survive. We're on earth to do the will of God.
Well, the gates of hell will not prevail
against it. Yes.
That means we have to charge the gates of hell.
Yes, that's right.
What can folks expect to hear tomorrow morning? A little bit of this?
Well, yeah, a little bit of this. Yeah, this Tony, and the return of the gods in a form for this. And I'm so blessed. This is your heart, because without the spiritual, the rest doesn't work. With the spiritual, God does powerful things in every realm.
I'm absolutely convinced, after a quarter of a century in politics, our nation stands at that moment that only God and the power of the Holy Spirit can lead us out.
Yeah, absolute, and he still can. He's never finished. He is never finished.
The question,
is
will we?
Yeah, that's right. If my people.
That's right. Rabbi Jonathan Cahn, always great to see you.
Always an honor to be here.
Look forward to hearing you tomorrow morning.
Thanks.
Folks, I hope you will join us if you're in the area. Come and be a part of this year's Pray Vote Stand Summit. If you're not, you can still be a part of it. We'll have information a little bit later at prayvotestand.org. You'll be able to participate and watch online. Also, if you're part of the Real Life Network, Pastor Jack Hibbs, my battle buddy, you'll be able to watch as well on the Real Life app. It's going to be a great weekend, and I would encourage those of you who are faithful viewers and listeners of Washington Watch not only to join us, but to be praying for this weekend. I think it's going to be a very significant weekend. All right, we're out of time. Till tomorrow, I leave you with this, the encouraging words of the Apostle Paul found in Ephesians 6, where he says, when you've done everything you can do, when you've prayed, when you've prepared, and when you've taken your stand, by all means, keep standing.
Washington Watch with Tony Perkins is brought to you by Family Research Council and is entirely listener-supported. Portions of the show discussing candidates are brought to you by Family Research Council Action. For more information on anything you've heard today, or to find out how you can partner with us in our ongoing efforts to promote faith, family, and freedom, visit TonyPerkins.com. Also, to leave a comment about Washington Watch, call our watch line at 1-866-372-7234. That's 1-866-372-7234.